What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review slash knife overview to do with you guys. This is the Alliance Designs and Matt Christensen Bangarang. This is the Micarta version. There is a version of it in carbon fiber and copper pivot colors currently available on Knife Center in two different blade finishes. This particular version is sold out at the moment. I do not know if there are future plans for this to come back to fruition. Anyways, this knife was provided for review by my good buddy at Spirited Whiskey on Instagram. Give him a follow. He provides a ton of knives for content on this channel, and without him, I wouldn't know about half of this stuff. So definitely, he's got a great Instagram, lots of great pictures. So give him a follow, absolutely. You guys know that I have Patreon, so you can pick up some cool exclusive stickers there, get access to my once-a-week Patreon exclusive content. I also have a Redbubble store with my new merch, so if you'd like to pick up some cool Metal Complex gear, check out my Redbubble link, which is right down at the top of the description. Let's go ahead and get a measurement of this guy. So from tip to scale, you are looking at... Gosh, I just was convinced it was going to be 8 inches, but it's actually only 7.5 inches overall. This is a big 7.5 inch knife. From tip to scale on the blade length, you're looking at 3.25. On cutting edge, you're coming in at just shy of 3.25, given how that belly sort of curves backwards there. How about some size comparisons? So, up against the Ontario Rat Model 1, the Rat 1 is coming in at 8.6 inches overall, so you can see there it's quite a bit longer than the Bangarang, even though the Bangarang definitely does not feel small. Held up against the Spyderco PM2. Spyderco PM2 is coming in at 8.3 inches overall. How about up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue? I find that this is the most similar feeling knife of the ones that I do a size comparison with. Certainly not, the closest, in resemblance, but out of everything that's out there. But in terms of the stuff that I show, if you've got one of these, this is the closest of everything that I sort of show there. 8 inches on the Ritter Hogue. And last but not least, the Spyderco Para 3. Spyderco Para 3 coming in at 7.25 inches. Curiously, only 1/4 inch smaller than this, and in a lot of ways, now that I'm seeing it, it has a few similar lines, but it is entirely different. Let's take a look at the carry profile real quick. So this is a fairly, I don't want to call it super thick knife, but there's some contouring, and the scales are definitely thicker than like on the Para 3, both at the front and the back. And then the contouring makes it feel a little bit wider, though that is kind of a charm to it. So in some ways, some people might say that that's a benefit. Some people might say that not. Truthfully though, in terms of how it carries in your pocket, in terms of height, it's definitely nowhere near the same height as like the PM2 or Para 3. It's really just in thickness and in weight. The actual position that it sits in your pocket is just fine. There's nothing really protruding to make it, really annoying or anything like that. Let's go ahead and weigh it here. So what we're looking at is fairly thick stock of RWL 34. We're going to talk about that here in a second. Let me show you guys the measurement here. Now these can be off a little bit, but yeah, I was going to say it's probably between 155 and 160 thousandths. Then we have Micarta sitting on top of some pretty thick, not super thick, titanium liners, and then we've got the titanium backspacer. So weight on this guy's coming in at, okay, not crazy, 4.73 ounces. That's going to be too heavy for some people at this size, but for me, no problem. I actually kind of like the solid feel. I was talking with Spirited just a little bit ago, and I think we both kind of have the same thought on it feels solid, but it doesn't feel overly heavy. Solid for the size that it is, and that's something that always gives me a positive feeling. So I really like that. How's the action on this guy? The action's fantastic. This is a thumb stud deployer. It is incredibly smooth. It will drop with just a little bit of encouragement here. It's very easy to do the reverse flick, whether you want to use your fingernail or you want to use the meat of your finger. For those of you wondering what I'm doing there, you can either dig your fingernail up underneath the thumb stud like this and kick it out like that, or what I actually like to do on this one is get the meat of my finger right behind that thumb stud and kick it out like this. People have asked me to do a demonstration of that reverse flick. Once you figure out the exact, the sort of muscle connection with your finger there, you can pretty much do it on any knife. Some people know exactly what I'm talking about. But for those of you who don't, at some point I'll do a video demonstration of the reverse flick on knives like this. Anyways, let's go ahead and talk about materials here. So like I said, we're looking at beautiful micarta. I would call this kind of a, I don't know, I mean, it's like a classic canvas micarta or natural micarta. It's just fantastic. We're looking at a titanium pivot collar here, some bead blasted titanium liners that are solid, titanium pocket clip, and titanium backspacer. Then we're looking at RWL 34 for the blade steel. RWL 34 is insanely similar in composition and performance to CPM 154, and it's also a steel that Damasteel uses in combination with another steel to make their actual Damasteel product and Damacore. So in terms of a performance blade, a lot of you guys know when I talked about my favorite EDC steels of all time, CPM 154 is my favorite user steel. RWL 34 is essentially the same thing. There are subtle differences, ones that are beyond my comprehension because I'm not a metallurgist or a professional, but in terms of choices that they had for a user blade steel, I think they nailed it. That's of course after the legendary Robert W. Lovelace, the RWL in that. So anyways, on this particular one, we have a satin finish. I always call these blade shapes reverse tanto. I think some people would look at that and think like clip point sheep's foot or something crazy. In any case, the blade shape is just amazing. It's truly awesome. You have an enormous amount of belly, and despite this being a fairly thick stock to begin with, it does come down to a nice thin cutting edge. That is a definitely a performance-oriented cutting edge. You're going to have no problem slicing into material. You still have a nice puncture tip despite there being quite a bit of material up here and a decent amount of thickness run down to the tip. So I would say this is a pretty darn durable blade shape. You can see there the flat does extend to about 75 to 80% the length of the blade. There's a very prominent swedge up here and then this aggressive drop down towards the tip. It's very interesting. Blade shapes like this are very interesting, and at the same time you have an enormous amount of cutting belly and a nice thin edge. Very performance oriented. You can see there Mr. Christensen's logo there. By the way, he's from Illinois, and he's a pretty young guy, but he has been a custom knife maker for a while. I don't know a lot about him. I'm sure a lot of you know more than I do, but I'm thankful for the opportunity to handle this knife so I can learn about some makers and sort of experience some of the collaborative efforts that they've been involved with. Anyways, let's talk about the swedge up here. So you have a little bit of a sharp edge right there. You can see there I'm shaving off a little bit of my fingernails. It's not crazy. It's not the worst that I've ever felt. It's a little bit sharper up here, but I can't think of a time where my fingers are going to be up there. For some people, that's going to bother you. Sorry, I'm cleaning this off now because that's gross. So other people, it's not. On the tumbled version that is available at Knife Center right now with carbon fiber, I would imagine those edges are knocked down quite a bit. Just know that on these satin versions, that is definitely going to be the case. There is a nice sharpening choil down there, which is fine. The blade is ever so slightly in the cutting path. With a blade like this, you're probably going to be doing more of a curved cut, but if you cut straight down, you're going to run into that thumb stud a little bit. I do appreciate here you can see the jimping is not sharp, and for whatever reason, the corners on the jimping have actually been knocked down ever so slightly, so they don't catch my fingernails as much. It's just the right amount of traction, right? It feels good. I can lock in. It doesn't hurt my thumb. That's great. Thumb studs are absolutely perfect. There's a little teeny tiny cutout in the scale to give you just a little bit more room to that thumb stud, and that's so nice. It just drives me crazy on knives when they just don't make the right amount of room to get in behind that thumb stud, and they do it just right here, and I really, really appreciate it. By the way, a little bit about Alliance Designs. I had to learn about them. So Alliance Designs, as Mr. Whiskey explains it to me, is a company that does, they do have their own, designs. They work with some high-end custom makers, but essentially they collaborate, when they decide, based on what the design is, when they're working with a custom knife maker, in terms of who they choose as an OEM, they'll use different OEMs for different parts. So if, they're looking for, a specific blade grind and they feel like, that Riot's going to do that the best, and they go with Riot for the blade, and then maybe they'll go with Kaiser for the hardware or Wii for the hardware, So what they do is they sort of, make sure that they're getting the best of the best by individual parts. And that's really, really cool. And obviously, the end result of that is incredible fit and finish and precision in the final design. Spoiler alert, at 10 minutes in, fit and finish and, you know, the design on this thing is almost flawless in my opinion. I am blown away by the final product of this. This is amazing. Like I said, action is great no matter what you're doing. You know, forward thumb flick or the reverse flick, and then just with a little bit of encouragement, it will fall shut. Take a look at just how beautiful these edges are, how perfectly seamless they are up against that bead blasted titanium. That is just wonderful. I told Spirited, I said, I never knew I'd like this. I really like the look of natural canvas micarta up against bead blasted titanium. That is a sharp look, and I really, really like that. There are no sharp edges to speak of all the way around on this knife. It's very comfortable. It's nicely rounded off. The only sharp edges, of course, being up there on the back of the blade and, of course, the cutting edge itself. But down here where your hands are, no problem. Let's take a look at the hardware size on this guy. Get out my handy-dandy WIA bit selector and WIA magnetic driver, two items that are extremely inexpensive that I can recommend to everybody. So you can find links for those down in the description, as well as links for some of my favorite high-end American production knives, Chinese production knives, and some of my favorite budget knives. There is a ton of stuff down there. If you've never checked out my description, if you're watching my channel because you've got the itch, I promise you there's something down there for everybody, so check out my description. Anyways, I'm going to guess that the pivot is a T8. So that's what we've got here. Let's just take a look real quick. Yeah, pivot's a T8. How about the hardware? Yeah, the hardware. I was convinced that those were T6, but it was just throwing me off. Actually, the scale screws are T8. Oh, darn it. I have to prove this on camera. Yeah, those are T8. Sorry, I'm bumping the camera. I'm trying to show everybody that it actually does fit in there. That's fantastic. Now, the scales fit on top of the titanium liners, and that's undoubtedly where the screws are that actually hold or sandwich the pieces together. But like what I'm saying is there's more screws underneath here that go into this backspacer. I'm gonna guess those are T8 as well. I'm just gonna guess. I'm not gonna take this apart because it's not mine, but that's usually the case. If they got a theme going on with T8 all the way around on the pocket clip as well, then that's probably the case. How perfect is that backspacer? Normally, I prefer a gear pattern, but I think with the look of this, I think that this is just, it's nice. The backspacer is absolutely flawless. It's just perfect. There's not really much to say about it. It's fantastic. Pocket clip, very simple. Again, it goes with the design. It's going to carry about right here. You have a little bit of the knife sticking up out of your pocket, nothing crazy. It's got more of a swoop than a bill, which I really appreciate it. And I can tell you, coming in and out of the pocket, it's absolutely flawless. Carry position, sort of that banana curvature. It just carries very, very well, despite it being a little bit thick. But part of that thickness is coming from the contouring, which is actually giving you a benefit in terms of ergonomics. You can see there's slight contouring on the handle scales. That makes for a wonderfully comfortable ergonomic experience. It does have sort of this taper off the back end, which means your pinky rests on that back end. Normally, I don't like that because it feels like my pinky's going to slide off, but it's not. It's more of a casual drop. And I feel like my pinky is very comfortable there. So it does have a full four-finger position grip. You are pretty much dedicated to one area, but that one area is done exactly right. I'm locked in really, really well. Also, because this is a liner lock, no matter how much pressure you put on the scales, you are not affecting the lock. The lock stays there. You're putting pressure on the scales. You can squeeze it as hard as you want, and you're good to go. This were a frame lock. Squeezing in is going to put unnecessary pressure on the frame lock. That's one downside, in my opinion, to a frame lock. It does hold the lock in place, yes, but it also does kind of affect lock face geometry a little bit, and it can cause, you know, excess wear on the lock face over time. Though it does create, you know, just while we're on the topic of frame locks, it does actually help ensure that the lock stays in place. I just prefer this in terms of, like, if I'm really going to use it hard, it's nice to know that I can just squeeze this as hard as I want, put as much pressure on that, and it's not going to affect the liner lock. There is no lock stick whatsoever. Very easy to access that liner lock and disengage it. See there, it's locking up at something like, I don't know, 20%, Early, but incredibly solid. No blade play up, down, left, or right. Absolutely solid and absolutely perfectly centered. Just perfect. You can see here on the back, the stop pin is deep in there, and there's some enormous shouldering, so lots of surface contact for the blade. Just really, really well put together. I really like this. I don't know that there's really a whole lot I'm going to complain about here. It's just one of those things where they chose the right, whoever they chose. I don't know exactly who they chose for what part, but whoever they chose just did it exactly right. I mean, let's take a look at this pivot collar here, something I didn't talk about. This is very pleasant to look at. The contrast with the polished pivot hardware, and then it being subdued up against this natural canvas micarta, that's just wonderful. And this micarta, the nice thing about this lighter colored micarta, it's going to absorb your hand oils a little bit over time, and it's going to give it this nice aged look. At some point, this is going to look like a knife where nobody's going to know really, is that an older knife or is it a newer knife? I mean, most people are going to know, in the knife world, that it's a newer tactical knife. But this is the type of knife that's going to age well. They thought about the end user. They thought about the materials. They thought about, how this is going to break in over time. This knife was absolutely intended to be used 100%. And I really, really appreciate that. So this knife is manufactured in China, but there is a lot of hand fitment and human attention at the very end of it. Alliance Designs does go in and make sure that everything is meeting up correctly, that everything's assembled correctly. So that is an additional process, and that does add to the cost. And that's why we have such a finished product. That's why we have something that looks so perfect and does feel and act different than some other ultra high-end production knives that are really, really nice, but you can tell that there's just a little bit more love that goes into this. So the end result of Alliance Designs, teaming up with prestigious knife makers and then using a combination of different OEMs, this end result, that's a lot of effort. That's a lot of little tiny things that they got to go in and get right and coordinate, with these different OEMs. But the end result is just fantastic, and this is awesome. Like I said, there is a carbon fiber version of this currently available on Knife Center with either a satin or tumbled blade. I want to say they're on sale for $330. And I know a lot of you are going, dang it. I thought he was going to say that this is a relatively, inexpensive knife, in terms of what we'd expect. So you have to understand, and I told Spirited this, I think that's right on the money, considering all of the different processes. They go out of their way to make sure that each individual piece is being manufactured perfectly, right? There's so much thought that goes into it. And then on top of that, there is human interaction, hand fitment, stuff like that goes into it. I don't have a problem with that price. I think you're getting a nearly perfect product in terms of a production knife for that price. This version is gone. I want to say the original micarta versions went for $350, but you can get, being able to get the carbon fiber with copper, it looks really nice actually. The tumbled or the satin with the copper pivot collar and the carbon fiber scales, it looks really, really nice for $330. I can get on board with that. So this knife actually, despite it being well out of a lot of people's price range, it is definitely still a knife that I'm going to recommend. It's on the more expensive side of knives that I recommend on this channel, but it is going to go on my most recommended playlist. So you can find it there. For those of you who aren't familiar with that playlist, you can check that out. But yeah, this is wonderful. And Spirited, I really appreciate you letting me play with this. I've had a lot of fun with this guy over the last couple of weeks, so thank you. In any case, guys, that's going to be pretty much it. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on this metal complex logo right here and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.